Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that invites you into discussions taking place in your community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, the Dean and Academic Vice President of the college, Michael Marsden.
My fate decided I'm a dead man walking. I'm a dead man walking.
Good evening. My name is Michael Marsden, and I'm your host for this edition of Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our special guest this evening is Sister Helen Prejean. Sister Helen is a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and she joined the Sisters of St. Joseph in 1957. She received a Bachelor of Arts in English and Education from St. Mary's Dominican College in New Orleans, and followed that by a Master of Arts in Religious Education from St. Paul's University in Ottawa, Canada. She has been the Religious Education Director at St. Francis Cabrini Parish in New Orleans, the Formation Director for her religious community, and has taught junior and senior high school. You might also recognize her as the author of the book Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 31 weeks and has been translated into 10 different languages. The book was also nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 1993 and was later made into a movie starring Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn. Today, Sister educates the public about the death penalty by lecturing, organizing, and writing, and continues to counsel inmates on death row as well as the families of victims. Sister Helen, welcome to our program. We really are privileged to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
How did you ever finally decide to get into prison ministry? Because that came a little later in your career, didn't it?
Well, finally decide. It's not like you plan this,
No,
you know,
of course
that you're going
not.
to be a nun and one day you can go to death row.
Right.
I got involved with poor people in New Orleans, struggling African-American people. And the way we used to talk about which college you were going to, everybody in the projects was talking about who was in what prison. So while I was there, I got invited to write a man on death row. His name was Patrick Saunier. And 2.5 years later, I was with him when they electrocuted him to death.
Did you have any special training for the prison administrator, or was this something you became self-educated about because of the necessity?
No. I mean, you know how to deal with people. I had learned the art of compassion and conversation and truthfulness with people. So I figured that relating to this man was going to be, in a way, as a human being like everybody else. And I knew that he was there for a very special reason, that he had been convicted of murder, and that honesty would be a part of our conversations. But there was nothing special. What
made him, what made Patrick Saunier so special to you? Because it's a powerful and compelling story, as we've seen both in your book and in the film version, as well, by the way, as in the play version, which we happened to have read on campus here about, I think, 1.5 years ago.
Did you?
And the school theater project version of it, which is a very powerful.
Yeah, Tim Robbins did that, and it's the first time a playwright ever wrote a play and gave it over to the young people of the country to do.
Yes,
it's a 10-year project, so I'm glad that St. Norbert's has been part of that.
Well, it was a wonderful experience. I actually read part of it myself, one small role. But what is it about Patrick that became so compelling to you? Because obviously you could have. Well,
we could have been anyone, but I had never been with anybody on death row. I'd never been in the company of someone who had committed murder. And I was very nervous at that first visit because I thought, are we going to be able to have like a normal conversation? I had such an image in my mind, as many of us do, that people on death row are the worst of the worst. They have killed people and they'd love to kill again. And when the guards brought me in and then brought him and locked him in a booth, and I looked at him through this heavy mesh screen, I went, my God, he's a human being. His face was as human as yours or mine.
Did you connect with him right away? I mean, I realize you corresponded with him.
You know what the connection is? He was so glad someone had come to see him. Imagine when you wake up in the morning, you get 1,000 signals that you're nothing but disposable human waste. And you have a number and you're nobody. And a visit, really, what it really is about is respect. And so he was just so glad to have a visitor. It all unfurled from there, of course.
Of course. And, as I say, it's a compelling story in whatever version of it you run across it, whether it's play, film, or your book itself. But what I just was wondering what was so special about him, and I guess what you're saying is you connected to other prisoners through him as well, over time.
I mean, it was almost a fluke the way it happened, because I came out of the Adult Learning Center where I was working with high school dropouts, and somebody from the Prison Coalition office happened to be coming down St. Andrew Street. This is there in Hope House in New Orleans, and said, "Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal to somebody on death row?" I didn't even know they were going to kill him, because it was 82, and they were just cranking up the machinery of death again. I thought I was only going to be writing letters.
And not actually visiting him and becoming part of the whole process.
Yeah, right.
Now, I know that one of the major tensions in the film, and certainly in your book as well as in the play, is by extending compassion to a convicted murderer, as you did, you also received a lot of criticism from the other side, which would be the victims and their families and so on. And that, as I understand, led you to found the organization called Survive, which is focused on the victims as well. But you probably didn't start off thinking about it in quite that way, but it probably evolved, I would assume.
Well, actually, it was, I wrote a man on death row. I visited him, and they're going to kill him. In the process, I found out about the murder, that he and his brother had killed these 2 innocent teenage kids. And I made a big mistake. I mean, a lot of the tensions that came from the victim's family, part of it came from society. Right. And a cultural setting up that the way you honor victims' families is to kill the one who killed their loved one. And if you're not on that side, you must be against them. But the other part was just my own mistake, because I didn't reach out to them. And when I met them at the Pardon Board hearing, last step in Louisiana before someone's executed, and it couldn't have been more polarized. It was the worst time.
Because they're testifying to
well,
get
they're
executed.
there to get their justice. They have waited for their justice. And here's this nun who's visiting the murderer and didn't even come to see them. And so it was fierce. It was one of the families was very, very angry, and they refused to talk to me, which I deserved. I want to say that, because I should have reached out to them. But I was totally surprised by the other family. And Lloyd LeBlanc and his wife Eula LeBlanc, their son David, 17, had been killed. And they're really the heroes of Dead Man Walking, because Lloyd LeBlanc, even though I had reached out and I had done it all wrong, he said, "Sister, all this time you've been visiting with those 2 brothers, but you didn't once come to see us. You can't believe the pressure we're under with the death penalty." And this shocked me. See, I thought every victim's family would want the death penalty, and I didn't know what the pressure was. And he invited me to come pray with him in this little chapel, which I did, and then to visit. He said, "You need to come walk with us and know what we go through." And that's when I learned about murder victims' families. I also learned from him that forgiveness, far from being a weakness, is a great strength. And the way he explained it to me was, he said, "Sister, I've always been a kind man. From the time I was a child, I've loved doing things for people. And after David was killed, all those people were saying, 'Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty, or it's going to look like you didn't love David.'" And he said, "I didn't like the way that made me feel. I didn't like those feelings of hatred and bitterness toward those 2 fellows," as he called them. So he said, "They killed my son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And I'm going to do what Jesus said." And from him, he was the first. And then after that, I began to go to parents of murdered children support meetings. And that's when I got my second shock, how many people said that after the funeral, everybody stayed away from them because they didn't know what to do with their pain.
Right, how to talk
And
with
so
them.
they're very much alone, too. So that's why we started Survive for murder victims' families. And we need to do that all across this country. There are a lot of victims of violence.
There are. And, of course, the Amish taught us the lesson not too long ago about
they sure did,
with their forgiveness and their reaching out to the family of the individual.
You know, there's so much in our
crimes.
culture that the way you solve a social problem is you use violence to solve it. You know, and you extend it over to the terrorists, and it brings us right to Iraq. What you do is you go after people. You go after your enemies, you target them, and you kill them. And that's how you solve things. And that
endless.
applies to the death penalty. Yeah.
It's endless, ultimately.
Yeah.
Now, you're a pretty sought-after speaker. I mean, I read through your resume, which was remarkable, and you have a lot of platforms now to speak from regarding things like the death penalty. The number of honorary degrees you've received is stunning, actually. It's quite impressive, ultimately. Have you had now an opportunity to further your causes much more effectively because these platforms have become available to you?
Because you know what it is? It's all about getting people to reflect on this issue. Mm-hmm. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've traveled extensively in Europe and Australia and Japan, and a lot of times, especially in Europe, the question arises, why are the American people so always bent on violence? When it comes to the death penalty, what I've discovered now, of coming to places like here at St. Norbert's and in Iowa and in Mississippi and in Texas, and it's not that the American people are wedded to the death penalty. They have real deep convictions. They just have never thought about it deeply. Right. So they hear, oh, terrible crime, oh, person deserves to die, end of reflection. Mm-hmm. And that's why the arts, it's why the movie of Dead Man Walking, Susan Sarandon made that movie happen. She pestered Tim Robbins for 9 months till he broke down and read the book. It was probably for domestic tranquility that he read the book. And then he saw, yeah, we got to do a film. And the film takes people over to both sides of the issue.
It does nicely, yes. It does.
You got to help people open up the ambivalence that we feel, because innocent people have been killed, and we're outraged over that. But then what do we do with that as a society?
And I thought Sean Penn was just excellent.
Wasn't he great? I mean, he should have gotten it.
The Academy Award.
Yeah, he should have gotten the Academy Award.
It was quite an effective, and the soundtrack is really overwhelming.
You know what Tim Robbins did? At one point he said, I must be crazy to be doing this. He sent a rough cut of the film to Johnny Cash and Eddie Vedder and Mary Chapin Carpenter. Bruce Springsteen had done the title song. And he sent him the rough cut, and he just said, if you move to do an original song. Mm-hmm. And they did, and that's the album. It's more than the soundtrack. It's an original album. Sony has put it out. It's got Johnny Cash's song is haunting.
Yes. Because
he has this refrain of people waiting to be executed, the mental anguish. Mm-hmm. And he goes, and it all goes down in your mind, in your mind, in your mind. And then 1 foot on Jacob's ladder and 1 foot in the fire, and it all goes down in your mind. He really captured that feeling of waiting to be killed.
I agree. It was a very powerful film for me. The first time I've seen it. I want to remind our viewers that you're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our very special guest this evening is Sister Helen Prejean, and our topic is the death penalty. The death penalty is, of course, an international issue. It's not just a U.S. issue. There are over 60 countries now who still have the death penalty, and there are about 137, according to what I've read, that have eliminated it.
You know what's really interesting about that?
Mm-hmm.
40 years ago, only 20 countries did not have the death penalty.
Really?
And over this period of time, and you have to ask the question, what has happened in the world that you would have this massive influx away from the death penalty? Rwanda was the last country to do away with the death penalty.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And what it is human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as societies have developed, and we've developed prisons, we have a way to incapacitate dangerous people to protect ourselves so we don't have to repeat the violence.
What are some of the major reasons you cite for doing away with the death penalty, for abolishing it?
The heart of it is it always involves torture of a human being. You render a person defenseless and you take them out and kill them. Wisconsin's wise. Wisconsin's never bought into the death penalty. So a person is in a cage as big as a small bathroom for 15 or 20 years, and they're taken out and killed. It always involves torture because mental torture is as real as physical torture. Sure. And conscious, imaginative human beings, all the people, I've accompanied 6 people to their deaths, all of them had the same nightmare. And it is, they're coming, it's time, they're coming to get me. And they're dragging me out of my cell, and I'm screaming and going, no, no. And then I wake up. I'm in my cell. It's not my time to go. So the essence of it is that we are imitating the violence in order to try to set an example that we don't want our people practicing violence. So it has a profound inherent moral contradiction. Now we've been at it 30 years. We put it back in 76, and look at the track record. At first, when we started going down the road, we thought it would deter crime.
Right. Doesn't work.
The states that do the death penalty have roughly double the homicide rate of states that don't. We make mistakes all over the place. 130 wrongfully convicted people have come off of death row. In my second book, The Death of Innocence, I give the structural reason why it's inevitable that innocent people are going to be put on death row along with the guilty. And the structural reason is poor people have to take the defense they're given. They don't actively pursue all the resources, get independent forensic testing, don't get the experts. And the jury never hears the truth. In my second book, Death of Innocence, I accompanied 2 people to execution. The reader will know more about what happened than the jury did because the prosecution withheld it. Like in the case of Joseph Odell, it was a jailhouse informer that the DA needed to hammer the last nail into the death sentence, and the guy lied. Well, how does a juror...
No.
I mean, you know, the guy's saying he confessed to me in the cell. They don't know. So they do their best, but because you don't have a way of getting to the truth, because it's so heavily weighted on the side of prosecution controls the forensic evidence, if they have DNA evidence and suddenly it mysteriously disappears, they have the original police report, which shows that from the beginning there was someone else who was the suspect, but they zero in. All these things happen. And the angels of our better natures do not come out when prosecuting attorneys are under pressure. If a citizen of high status has been killed, the media is profiling it, they got to get someone.
Somebody's got to
and all of that, it leads to our making errors. And death is absolute. We don't need it. And we're not doing it well.
Well, back to your earlier argument, you're saying that, particularly in a lot of the countries that have eliminated it, they've come up with a life imprisonment that is
which
meaningful.
we have,
Yeah.
and which we have. The states that don't have it, if you don't get the death penalty, life without parole sentences in this country, the United States, are real sentences.
A little less than a year ago, the American Bar Association, they were sort of reporting on a nationwide study they did. It was a 3-year study, and they were calling for a moratorium on executions. That was about a year ago. Do you know where their position is these days?
The American Bar
Association.
Yeah, you know, they're not a flaming liberal group, the American Bar Association. It took a long time for them to come to that, and finally then the vote. It was earlier than a year ago, because they could see the inequities in the way the whole thing is set up with poor people and the kind of defense. They could see the mistakes that are inevitable in it. And so they were calling for fairness in it. And the way it is now, they know that it's inevitable that innocent people are going to be in there along with the guilty. And so they called for a moratorium. And what a moratorium means, freeze all the executions,
Right.
and let's take a deep, hard look, like New Jersey did. New Jersey did for like 7 years. And they had a hearing last December for the first state, but legislatively and with the governor signing it, did away with the death penalty. And you know what was one of the big things that helped that to happen? 62 murder victims' families testified at the hearing, saying that's not going to honor our dead child. And don't put us through this for 15 years and then tell us that by sitting on the front row and watching you kill the person, it will heal us. It just prolongs our grief, and it's futile. It's not a healing thing to watch somebody be killed. What we need is help from the community to carry on with our lives. And so they were very telling in that in New Jersey. They lit up the Roman amphitheater when New Jersey did away with the death penalty. I have pictures
Interesting.
of it. Yeah.
Interesting. How did you respond to Governor Ryan in Illinois and his kind of last-minute effort to sort of, he pretty much commuted all of the...
Yeah, but it wasn't last minute. I mean, that man really went through a journey. He started out as a believer in the death penalty. When he campaigned, it was not even an issue. Of course he was for the death penalty. He signed it into law in Illinois, and he's governor. And then they start coming into his office. Governor, we got an innocent, turns out he's innocent on death row. And after 5, after 10, after 12, after 13, he goes, we have a broken system here. So what he did was he inaugurated this study for both sides, law enforcement, victims' families, people on all sides of the issues, bipartisan. And they came up with 85 reforms. Mm-hmm. And he submitted 2 reform packages to the Illinois legislature, and they wouldn't look at either of them. And that's what led him. And, that decision of his to commute those sentences of all the people on death row was very tough for a personal reason as well, because one of the men on death row had killed his friend and neighbor in a very brutal way.
I wasn't aware of that.
And he was among the people on death row.
Interesting.
So it was very much a journey of conscience that he did. And he said, I know that most of the people on death row are guilty, but I also know that we have such a broken system that some are innocent. And even though it includes commuting the sentence of this man who killed my friend in conscience, this is what I have to do.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Because it certainly was presented to the press as a kind of a last-minute effort.
Those that followed it, though, you could see that it was a
Were you in communication with the governor?
Yes, I've met him on several occasions. Good. Yes.
Interesting.
He did. I love it when people just stand up for principle. It's so refreshing, because a lot of times with politicians, the death penalty is 99% political symbolism. It's really not about stopping crime. Less than 1% of all the people who commit murders are chosen for death. It's very racist. Did you kill white people or not is finally the determining factor. Because when people of color are killed, people don't even care. But it's about political symbolism, because it's so easy to look like you're tough on crime that you're for the death penalty. Now notice, it's pretty much disappearing from the presidential political discourse,
It is not,
which means that it's dropped below the radar screen because it's in diminishment. Fewer states are practicing it. Fewer DAs are going for it, because now there's just so many problems with it. We will abolish it. We're on our way to abolishing it in practice, and finally we'll do it on the books.
Are there any circumstances under which you think the death penalty would be justified?
We can never give that power to government. Like, suppose we say, let's let government kill people when it's a terrorist act. All right. Well, then you go, well, if it's a terrorist act, well, what about Timothy McVeigh? He set off a bomb and killed 168 people. It's got to include Timothy McVeigh. What you end up is you try to get a designer death penalty. There have to be some instances. And in fact, the criteria that the Supreme Court is given for the death penalty, which nobody knows how to apply, but what they say is, only give the death penalty for the worst of the worst murders. Not your ordinary murders.
But the worst of the worst.
Not your garden variety murders. Now, who knows what that means? If your mother's killed, you're going to call that an ordinary murder. And so the truth is, when you give government that power, they're going to expand it. Politics enters into it. And then when you go to practice it, there are constitutional protections, about 6 of them, that everybody's supposed to have. A jury of your peers, an impartial jury, an attorney by your side, due process of the law, right to confront your accusers. But in practice, it doesn't get practiced, because if you're poor, then and you don't have someone to access all of these rights for you. So that's why we can never give government the power to over death.
Now, Catholic teaching on the death penalty has gone through a shift over the last 100 years. How would you best describe the current position of the Church on it? Because it's not been crystal clear to a lot of people.
Well, let me tell you, it is not crystal clear to a lot of people, but I got to have a dialogue with Pope John Paul. Now, this is after dialoguing with my church for over 15 years on the death penalty. And to put it in kind of in a diagram form, Catholic Church, like most Christian churches, upheld the right of the state to take life. That's like at the top of a pyramid here. Because we didn't have prisons. It was a way to defend society. You got to defend society. It was never about vengeance. It was never about you kill so you deserve to die. Okay, so the state has a right to take life, to defend society for grave or grievous crimes. Those are the 3 poles. Mm-hmm. Well, Pope John Paul, in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, pushed the death penalty to the edge, says we have a way to defend society, so it should be rare if not non-existent. But he left a big loophole. Yeah, right. And he said, but in cases of absolute necessity, related to the question you're asking, there must be some instances. And so when I had a chance to dialogue with him, those were 2 of the cardinal points. I said, if you say in cases of absolute necessity. Any state that executes will call it an absolute necessity.
Sure.
In Nigeria, you're stoned if you have a baby out of wedlock, and they call it an absolute necessity. If you go into the airport in Malaysia, death penalty for anybody bringing drugs. It's an absolute necessity. They will always call it that. You got to remove the loophole. And what the Pope did was that third, or the criteria for a grave or grievous crime, he cut that out of the catechism. So if you state it now, we have a way to defend life without killing. So no matter how grave or grievous the crime. And the test case for the Catholic Church after the Pope did this was Saddam Hussein. And I waited. What would the Vatican say? Because if there's an exception, it's going to be Saddam Hussein. And the second point of my dialogue was, Your Holiness, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of the innocent? What about the guilty? And when I am walking with someone to execution and he says, Sister, please pray God holds up my legs. His legs are shackled, his hands are cuffed, he's surrounded by guards. There is no dignity in this death because he's been rendered defenseless. And I think that really influenced. Now, there was dialogue going on all over the church. I was one part of it. But that's what changed it. So then when the Pope came to St. Louis, after the catechism was changed in 97, he was in St. Louis in 99, for the first time then, he put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues. No to abortion, no to euthanasia, and no to the death penalty because it's cruel and unnecessary. And he said, even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them.
What can our viewers do what steps can they take who, if they're opposed to the death penalty, they don't have the same platform that you do, but there certainly are certain things that they can do
and they have
to support the effort.
And they have to stay alert because you're going to have politicians run for office and claim they want to bring it back into Wisconsin. It's under constant threat. But one of the things is really to become knowledgeable about it. And so I encourage them to read. Amnesty International is a great source of information. And there's also another one called the Death Penalty Information Center. It's it gives you every bit of current information you need, as well as the history of the death penalty and studies that are coming out about the innocent and so forth. So to really read and be knowledgeable about it. What I've discovered is the death penalty is not a peripheral moral issue about what to do with a few terrible criminals, because all of the wounds of our society are in the practice of the death penalty. And our racism's in it. It's almost always when white people are killed.
As you mentioned, yes.
Yeah, and it's poor people, 98%.
Who can't afford a good defense.
And the other is, it's that instinct in us to try to solve social problems by using violence.
At that point,
and none of those are good for us as a country. And so by doing away with the death penalty, we got to get to the roots of crime. Do criminals, are they born criminals and they want to go kill somebody? I mean, we're smarter than that now. We know where the roots of crime are in society and what we have to do in terms of jobs and education and support for families to give people a strong start in their family so that they're not out on the streets using drugs and then doing crimes to get drugs.
I'm sure there's a lot more to do, but you must have a lot of satisfaction in the gains that have been made. I mean, these are very, very impressive gains.
Well, and the privilege of being with human beings who, even though they have done terrible crimes, are worth more than the worst act. And to be with the victims' families.
Yes.
I've learned so much from them. I've never been thrown in the fire like they've been thrown in the fire. But I learned that life is precious. You make every minute count. You don't spend your time on trivial things.
And certainly for them, it tests their sense of forgiveness and what that really means.
Yeah, and they're our teachers. They're the real teachers.
Well, it's been a privilege to have you with us.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you.
I'd like to thank our special guest this evening, Sister Helen Prejean, for sharing her expertise with us this evening. So please join us for future programs as we continue to explore the world of ideas. Until then, I'm Michael Marsden for Conversations from St. Norbert College.